I can't tell from up here. We have, I'm sure that, well, actually it was Molly that told me, I don't watch news a lot and stuff on TV anymore, as far as news goes, but I did not know that what was going on yesterday and the day before was going on. When she told me, I'd come inside and I felt like, wait a minute, what? And so I just want to, while it's on our minds, pray. Pray for everything that is going on. Pray for those people over there. And what we're going to be covering some this morning, we need to pray for Iran as well. We need to pray for those people. What we may consider our enemies are the very people that we are supposed to pray for and that we're supposed to love. And as hard as that seems for us, because we're human, God has his reasons, and Jesus Christ loves those people, and we should as well. Does not mean that we agree with them. It does not mean that we condone anything, but we are to love them because they are creations of God. But pray for the situation over there. It could be the precursor of something beyond what we're prepared for, and it may not. So just pray. We've been going over, last Sunday we were doing a summary, because we've been over so many commands that from Christ that a couple of people had asked about a summary of them. So as a reminder, and there will be 100 question test after this summary is done. So take notes and listen up. But what we ended with last Sunday, I will be starting with, it's actually, there were two commands in Matthew 5:38 through 48. And so I'm going to join these because they're independent in their own, but they're also very related. In this passage, Jesus confronts one of the most natural instincts that we have as humans, especially when we're younger. And hopefully as we mature, we learn to control this, but often we don't. And that is retaliation. That's a natural instinct. When you're a child, you watch two children playing. If one hits the other one automatically hits back. And that instinct stays with us all the way up to many of us to the day that we die. But Jesus tells us a different thing about that. And he says in this verse, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also." So, he's telling us not to resist an evil person. In this law of an eye for an eye, which you hear so much of, we've talked about in class, Dave has talked about it, but it is one of the most repeated parts of a verse, taken out of context and misunderstood, of just about any verse in the Bible. You hear it all the time. And this law of the eye for eye in Deuteronomy, and this was Deuteronomy 19:21, it was never intended as permission for revenge. It was actually the opposite of. It was a limitation on retaliation. It was supposed to be a form of justice equal to whatever had been done, rather than taking it too far, rather than going overboard with the retaliation. It was supposed to be justice. But Jesus raises all of that to a higher standard when he's talking. He calls us not merely to restrained justice as what we are told to do in the Old Testament, but this is now a radical grace that he is teaching, a mercy that he is teaching. So when insulted, we're not to escalate. And when wronged, we are not to retaliate. And as Paul said in Romans 12:21, he says, "Do not be overcome by evil." He says, "But overcome evil with good." And that goes against our nature. Turning the other cheek, people think, is a weakness. I used to think that. I mean, it just seems like if you don't defend yourself, that you're a weak person. But it is totally the opposite. You think of one of the strongest people you have ever read about, Jesus Christ. And yet, when he was being tortured and punished and abused, he could have leveled everything. He could have literally vaporized everyone that touched him and hurt him. He had the strength, but he restrained himself. And so when you are meek or when you are turning the other cheek, it is not a form of weakness. It is actually just the opposite. It takes more strength to do that than it does to retaliate. Turning the other cheek is strength under control. It's refusing to let someone else's sin dictate your reactions. When you let other people control your emotions, that's where the weakness is. And we're told to not allow that to happen. It breaks the chain of reaction that we instinctively want to respond with. It chooses a Christ-like character rather than a human character, especially pride. And then Jesus goes even further. And this is the second part, the second command, because they are associated. He says in that section of verses, whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Now, if you remember, in Roman-occupied Israel at that time, a soldier could compel a citizen to carry his pack for 1 mile. The first mile was an obligation. It was required. It was part of the law. But the second mile, if you carried it a second mile, was devotion. It was a big difference. It was devotion to God. The first mile says, I have to. The second mile says, I choose to, for the glory of God. And that is the type of attitude that Christ wants us to have. Jesus is teaching us that kingdom people don't just meet expectations, they exceed them. They don't cling to rights, which is, again, against our nature, especially Americans. They surrender their rights. They don't do the bare minimum. They reflect a generous Father. Paul modeled this in 1 Corinthians 9:19, saying, though I am free, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win even more. That is second mile living. And then Jesus reaches the summit of what his point is, the basis and the heart for all of what he has taught of so far. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Why? And then he answers that question that was unanswered but was on everyone's minds, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. That is why. Because God sends the sun and the rain on the just and the unjust. He's equal and fair in all of that. He shows kindness even to those who rejects him. So what is Christ's message in all this? It is, don't live by the world's culture that we see and that is instinctive to us. This logic of balance and payback. That is not what Christ wants of us. It's the other way. Live by the Father's pattern of mercy and generosity. If we've been talking about this. This is hard to conceptualize. Dave brought it up, Dave Nichols in class one time. God is just. That means that when we do something, there is a correction for it. There is a repercussion for it. And he is fair in all these things. So why aren't we outright punished for the things that we do all the time? And that's where, see, Christ throws a wrench into all of that stuff. Because he takes that. And as long as we are remorseful and we ask forgiveness, we are shown that mercy. And we are given that. And that's what Christ is saying. You have been given this mercy. You have been given this grace. Even though you don't deserve it. You deserve punishment. And Christ is saying, you need to treat other people the same way. Asking you to give like the Father does. Ask you to reflect his character. Take insults with grace. That sounds crazy. I can't. Someone's insulting me to my face. I can't think that I'm going to stand there and smile at him. I mean, there's going to be hair on my neck raising, the hackles going up, my blood pressure going up. But, you know, when it has been on my mind and I have thought about it before reacting, I have actually been able, Molly and I were talking about it on a drive-in this morning on something else, about something that someone said, and it's just like, just let it be like a duck's back. You've heard that. Just let it roll off. You remember the thing, sticks and stones? That there's truth to all of that. So that's what Christ wants us to do. Take these insults with grace. Be the stronger person. Release your obsessions with these rights that we have sometimes. Go beyond what is required. That is godlike and Christlike. Love, even when it costs you. Because when we go that second mile, we are looking like our Father. And that is who we are supposed to pattern ourselves after. The next command that we have already gone over is the one that is one of the most confusing we talked about. When people first read it, they said, I don't understand. How can I be that way? That's impossible. I am flesh and blood, and I am human. And in Matthew 5:48, Jesus Christ says, be perfect. Therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect, how can we be perfect like God? He's not crushing us with this impossible demand. He's calling us into something else, because we need to understand what he means by this. And he's talking about love. The word perfect used in the Greek means mature. It means whole. It means complete. It does not mean flawless. In context with Matthew 5, Jesus has just commanded us to love our enemies, pray for those who persecute us, and reflect the Father, who sends rain on the just and the unjust. Perfection then is not flawlessness. It is fullness of love. That is what perfection is. It is a maturity in God, in our spirit. The Pharisees, they focused on outward performances. And we know that. We've seen example time and time again. And Christ despised that. He brought it up often. But Jesus said in Gospel of Matthew 5:20, he says that our righteousness must surpass theirs. How? What were they good at? They were good at rule keeping. They were good at legalism. So, we don't go there. We don't surpass theirs by being stricter rule keepers. That is not the point. But by transformed hearts. They didn't have transformed hearts. Everything they did was superficial. It did not come from within. And that is how we are to exceed what they did. A heart that forgives. They weren't forgiving. A heart that shows mercy. And they did not show mercy. A heart that loves when it's hard. This maturity, it doesn't happen overnight. If you make the point and the decision right now today that I am going to be that way, it's not going to happen. You may get a start, but then you're going to stumble and you're going to wander and you're going to take a wrong path. But the point of it is not going to happen overnight. It comes down to what James says in 1:4. He says, perseverance makes us mature and complete. Constantly working at it. That's where the success comes from. God is forming something in us when we open ourselves to that, to his guidance. Philippians 1:6 reminds us that he who began a good work will carry it to its completion. He promises that. But he's not going to do it against our will. If we're not open to it, it's not going to happen. So it is on us to accept that completion and that work. And here is that beauty of the gospel, and that part of it. In Christ, we are declared righteous. We're not outside of Christ. But in Christ, we are declared righteous. And at the same time, we are being made holy. John 4:12 says, when we love one another, his love is made complete and perfected in us. And that is the goal. That is what Christ centers everything around. All of his commands come down to love. So, what is the most important part, the message in this command that he gives us? He says, love like your Father. Not conditionally, not selectively, but completely. Not even conveniently. Sometimes that is the way that we love and that we treat others, when it's convenient. But we're to be loving all the time under all conditions, completely, like our Father. When you forgive instead of resent, that is you following that path. When you show mercy instead of judgment, when you choose humility over pride, when you bend because you love someone, that is perfection in action. The true mark of spiritual maturity, Jesus says in verse 48, is to be perfect. Therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect, not flawless, but complete. That's our goal, is to try to be complete, to be mature Christians, reflecting the character of the Father. And the world doesn't need flawless Christians. There are those that think they are. But the world doesn't need that. It doesn't help the world to be flawless. It needs believers who reflect God. He is the only perfect one. And when we reflect Him, then we are following what the path that He wants us to take and the shape of who we're to be in spirit. Mature, consistent, Christ-like love. And then He comes upon Matthew 6, 1 through 8. And that is something that some of us struggle with, and we have met people like this. And that's okay, because this is about how we want to show ourselves to the world. This is about letting your deeds be seen in secret. Now, the actions that some people take, especially those that are very quick to let you know their accomplishments or their service, the deeds that they do, I don't know what spurns them on to be that way. We want to look good to other people. We've all done it in one form or another. We want people to look upon us, with pride, that we are good and that we are accomplished and that we are talented and that all kinds of things. Many of us need affirmation more than others do. And we strive for that by letting people know what our works are, what our deeds are. We tend to slip it into conversations at any opportunity. That is not what Christ is going to be telling us here. He says, let your deeds be seen in secret. In this passage, He gives us a sobering warning that it is possible to do the right things for the wrong reasons. Beware of practicing your righteousness before others to be seen by them. And this word seen carries the idea of performing on a stage. When you look it up in the Greek, it's basically the same definition. It's performing on stage. It's putting on a show. Jesus is saying, don't turn your spiritual life into a theatric production. Giving, praying, fasting, when you do those things, those are all good things. But when they're done for applause and for other people to see, they're worthless. They're valueless. The applause is going to be the only reward that you're ever going to get. And that's what Christ said. You've gotten your reward when you do those things for others to see it, when you tell people what you do. Jesus contrasts two audiences. He's contrasting the world and the Father. So who do you want to see what you have done and accomplished? 3 times He says, your Father who sees in secret will reward you. He says that 3 times through those sections. So that's the heart of this command. Live for the Father's smile, not for the applause of the world. This doesn't contradict Matthew 5:16, which we brought up when we went over this, which is, Jesus says, let your light shine. You think, how am I to let my light shine if I'm supposed to hide what I'm doing? There is a big difference, and it comes down to motivation, the reason that you are doing what you're doing. The difference is in chapter 5, the goal is that God is glorified when you do that. When you're letting your light being shined, when you're showing the world who you are, that you're a child of His, you're glorifying God. That's totally different than the reasoning from behind you letting other people know what your service is and bragging and basically letting people know how good you are at certain things or how hard you work. Chapter 6, that warning about letting others see what you're doing, that is the danger of self-glory, not glorifying God. Secret giving, God knows that. He sees that. And secret giving guards our heart from pride. It actually prevents it from forming. Because when pride starts is when others start to recognize what you do. And you feed on that. Secret kindness keeps our compassion pure. When no one else knows what our compassion is and what we're doing for others but God, that helps, keeps that passion that we have for others and that love pure. Secret prayer builds intimacy with God. Colossians 3:23-24 tells us, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as if working for the Lord, not men. And in Hebrews 11:6 says that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So here's Christ's, to me, most important message through that section. God sees what no one else sees. He always will. He sees the anonymous gift, and he sees the private tears that you shed in prayer. He sees the quiet sacrifice. Men do not need to see those things. You need to be doing them for God alone. And his reward is far greater than that human applause or how well someone else may think of you. So you live for an audience of one. And that is hard for us to deal with. When the spotlight fades and the crowd is silent, no one is now applauding you, let it be enough that your Father saw what you did. That should be enough reward. And then we have the path to true discipleship, one of Christ's commands. He says in Matthew 16:24, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. When Jesus spoke these words, he wasn't offering a spiritual upgrade for the super committed person. That's not what his intent was when he said this. He's setting up, and this is important, with all of his commands, this is a non-negotiable condition for anyone who is going to follow him. You read what he says. If anyone would come after me, and I looked this up in 5 translations, and when you pull it up in the Greek, it all means the same thing. The next word that follows after that, if anyone would come after me, he must. That is a qualifier. There is no outlets. There is no caveats. There's nothing. You have to, is what he's saying. You must deny yourself and take up his cross and follow me. In the Greek, that command could not be clearer. It is you must deny yourselves, no exceptions, no fine prints, and this message is unavoidable. If you refuse, he's saying you're not his disciple. He said, if you're going to follow me, you must do this, period. So it's very clear. The truth alone should shake us and make us think about what he's saying here. And it should drive us to examine the state of our hearts. What is denial of self? Self-denial is not self-hatred. I don't know if you've heard of some of these people that they're believers. I believe they do love God, but they abuse themselves. There used to be a practice of that, and there's certain sections of, even in the Catholic Church and other variations, they have a practice of abusing their bodies for self-punishment. They hate their bodies because it's flesh. But you need to look at what you're talking about here. God created you in his image. He redeemed you by Christ's blood, and he calls you beloved. You're not to hate yourself. Self-denial is not hating your body. The Greek word, arneomi, this is the very word that Peter used when he denied Jesus. The same word. Means to disown or renounce allegiance. That's what denial means. So, applied to self, it means that we refuse to follow our old sinful nature and place Christ on the throne of our lives. Do what he says. Follow what he says. Galatians 2:20. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. That is denial of self. And this is not a one-time act. It's not something you say one time, not something you think one time. Luke adds a sobering word to this, and it is something that should stand out, that I'm surprised that Christ didn't initially say it, but then he did later. But he says to do this, to pick up your cross and follow him daily. The key word is daily. Every morning, we choose again to dethrone our own agenda. That is what that means. Our culture shouts, be true to yourself, follow your heart. You hear that all the time. And Jesus says the opposite thing of all of that. This is the collision of kingdoms that represents exactly what self-denial is about. Colossians 3:3, for you died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When we deny ourselves, we don't lose our true life. We lose the false one, the one that was never intended for us to have. Christ, God, never intended us to have this life that we have now. We were intended to be with him in a special relationship in the Garden of Eden. But we messed that up. So, if we deny ourselves, we are doing that for the purposes of the life that we should have had. When we lose this false one, this is the one that is keeping us from the real thing. So, denial of self, what does it look like? Saying no to sin, even when it costs you. I don't know if you remember the story of Joseph. He fled temptation, but it cost him. He lost his freedom for it. Self-denial may cost you a relationship. It may cost you a promotion. It may cost you your reputation. But those things are all minor and worthless compared to what you gain. None of those compared to what sin cost. Romans 6:11. Surrendering personal rights. Paul gave up rights that he was entitled to for the sake of the gospel, time and time again. Sometimes God asks us to lay down the last word. It's not yours to do, it's ours. It's God's to do. We give up the right to be understood sometimes. We even give up our comfort sometimes. That's what we're asked to do. 1 Corinthians 9:12 repeats all of that, to give those things up. Serving without recognition is what we were talking about earlier. True self-denial is invisible. You do not see it. It is not advertised. You just do it. It's part of your life. Doing good without letting it slip into conversations. Jesus said to give in secret so that only the Father sees. And he repeats that several times. Philippians 2:3 and 4 and Matthew 6:1 through 4. And what that looks like is choosing God's will over your own dreams and your own choices. And Jesus modeled this perfectly in Gethsemane. Remember that scene. Jesus knows what is about to happen. He does not want to go through this. He is showing that he dreads what is about to occur. He asks God, his Father, to take this cup from him. So it is not anything wrong with dreading something that we feel is going to happen because of our service to God, because of our beliefs. There is nothing wrong with being scared. There's nothing wrong with really not, or feeling like you have a conflict about following God on something. He wants this. I'm struggling with doing it, but as long as it comes down to what Jesus Christ did. And he said, not my will, but yours be done. He expressed his reservations about what was about to happen. But in the end, he still succumbed. And he humbled himself. And he said, your will, not mine. Luke 22:42. Self-denial sometimes means releasing good desires, surrendering them to God who knows better. And it is taking up your cross daily. I've heard it repeated time and time again. People often misunderstand what that represents. It does not mean inconveniences and trials that you're struggling with. What it is a representation of, the cross represented death. It was an instrument of death. Anytime people saw the cross back in the day, that was a representation of torture and death. And as Bonhoeffer wrote, He said in one of his writings, when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. So what does he mean by that? He means your self-interest, your self must die, so that his mission may live. Taking up your cross daily, it really means just self must die daily. That is what the cross is that you're picking up, the death of yourself. And so it is a representation of that. And we are to do that daily. First thing in the morning, when you wake up, that is what we should think. God's will today, not mine. And then start your day with that on your mind. So what does this denial of self gain us? Jesus never calls us, ever, to a sacrifice without offering something infinitely better. Ever. Here's the great paradox of the kingdom that we struggle with when he said in Matthew 16:25, and you imagine the listeners that were listening, that heard this, they struggled with what was being said here. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. We know what that means. They didn't understand it at the time. But Christ is talking about true life. Clinging to your own plans and you lose. Surrendering them to Christ and you win. Always, fully and freely and forever. So freedom from yourself. That's what self-denial looks like. And that doesn't sound normal, freedom from yourself. What do I mean by that? Living for self is exhausting when you think about it. Always protecting your image, worrying about defending yourself, looking good in front of other people, looking out for yourself, accumulating. All these things that we do for self is very exhausting to keep up with. Self-denial sets you free from all that stuff. The cruelest master you will ever have is self, is yourself. Galatians 5:1 tells you that your cruelest master you will ever serve is you. Eternal reward, that is what we gain. Nothing surrendered to Christ is ever truly lost when you think about it. It's an investment and one lasts forever. When you put your money, your hard-earned money, into a savings account at a bank, is that money gone? Is it lost? Temporarily, you don't have access to it. It's not there at your hands anymore, but it's building interest, right? There was a reason for that. Similarly, it's the same thing with the kingdom. When you give up the things that you think you need and want, whatever you think it is that you need, and you sacrifice and give that stuff up, it will be returned to you in spades. You are putting an investment into heaven. This is salvation for eternity that you're working toward. That is what your goal is and what you're investing in. Matthew 19:29. You also gain a deeper fellowship with Christ. When you walk that road of self-denial, you begin to understand his suffering better, to empathize. It's hard for us to do that when we have not experienced it. When we're trying to help someone that is in pain from something, a trauma in their life, or a struggle they're going through, when we haven't experienced it, we often will never really understand what they're going through. But when we have, and sometimes that's the reason I think that that is a mission, a ministry for some people, they have gone through something traumatic or something really bad in their life they've experienced and come out of it. They are now in a position to help others going through the same thing because now they can relate. That's what self-denial helps us to understand Jesus Christ better. I don't think we will ever even get that close to really being able to put ourselves in his shoes with the things that he actually struggled with, because we do not have the mind and the heart as pure as he is. So we are not as affected by the sin that is around us like he would be. But we will have an idea when we do this self-denial. It gives us also a life that points other people to Jesus Christ when we do and practice self-denial. The world has enough self-centered people chasing their own glory right now. A life of genuine self-denial, that stands out to people. They see that. They recognize it. And it's startling to them because they're used to everyone grabbing and pulling into themselves working for themselves and trying to accumulate and make themselves look better. And when you have someone that is not doing any of those things, it really does stand out. That is what letting your light shine is. It's visible, and it glorifies the Father. So denying yourself isn't grim. It is not joyless. It's a doorway. It's a path that we choose to take. But it is one to real life. It is a path to deep freedom and eternal reward, and a closer fellowship with the one who gave everything for us. He's not asking you to give up what is best. He's never asked that. We may think we have an idea of what is best, but he has a different idea. He knows what is best. He's asking you to give up what is lesser, so he can give you himself. We don't always understand that. Children do not understand that. When you take something away from them that is harmful or not good from them, they don't understand why you're taking that away at the time. And we are the same way. We're God's children, and sometimes we may struggle. Why was this removed from me? But he's taking away what is of lesser value to give you something that is worth more. And in the end, what he gives you is infinitely much more than anything we could leave behind. So, in the end of this, these commands, when we close here, there's a culmination. They all center around one thing. They form it, and that's love. But what they're really saying individually, as we break them down, these commands were: do not resist an evil person. Go the second mile. Be perfect. Beware of practicing your righteousness before others, and deny yourself. These aren't random instructions when you think of them. These are invitations into a different kind of life, and it is a life that looks like Jesus. And that is our goal. They call us to lay down our pride when we want to fight back. To give more when we feel that we've already given enough sometimes. To grow up into mature and complete love. To live for the Father's smile rather than the applause. And I was just thinking, this struck me that at work is a good example sometimes. I was talking with one of my guys a couple weeks ago, and he had gone to great lengths to this work we were performing. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but he was making it very clear whenever anyone, I was watching him, whenever anyone would walk by, his hands were busy, he had his flashlight out, and he had his tool in there in the wing of this aircraft. And when they would walk away, then he would go back to looking at the checklist and doing just about everything he could do, but he wasn't really touching the airplane. But then if he heard him walking, then he was back to doing that again. And then later on, he was talking about how sore his hands were because for the last 2 hours he had been doing this and doing that. And one of the guys said, he goes, I saw you in there. He goes, you put in a lot of work on that. He goes, that was a good job. And so he was getting these compliments. And you could just see the guy light up and beam. And I was just thinking of that. I want to feel that way when God tells me that. I want to hear that, well done. Because that is what all of this is about. Not the smiles and adorations of other people. Although it feels good when given. I watched this guy, and it really pumped him up, And I'm thinking, if God said that to you, what would you feel like now? Anyway, we do those things. Christ is giving these commands that they're not just for him. Jesus once said in the Gospel of John 14:15, and we repeat it again, if you love me, you will keep my commands. Notice, though, what he did not say. He didn't say, if you fear me. He didn't say, if you want to impress me, you will do these things. He said, if you love me, you will do these things. So obedience isn't just about salvation, it's about expressing love to Jesus Christ. And here's something that we often forget. Obedience is not just for God's glory, although that's the goal of it, but it's for our good. When we obey, then we're freed from what we've just talked about, the prison of revenge. We're released from this exhaustion of performing for other people for our own good, and we're protected from the destruction of selfishness. God's commands, if you don't think of it any other way, think of it this way. They're not chains on us. They're guardrails. That's what these commands are. They keep us centered and keep us on a path. And if we obey them, we will be on that path. We will stay there. And the world says to assert yourself. Jesus says, no, I want you to deny yourself. The world says get even. But Jesus says, no, don't resist that evil person. Go the second mile with him. And the world says be seen. And Jesus says, no, do what you do in secret, but let God see. So the question today isn't, do I understand these commands the way that Christ intended? It should be, do I love him enough to obey them? That should be the question. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. That's what Christ commanded us. So let's not just hear his voice. We need to follow his voice. And let our obedience be the evidence of our love, not just our words. Christ warned us about lip service. This is the opposite of it. When you obey him, when you're obedient, you are showing your love. There's not lip service. And we hope, I pray, that our lives reflect Jesus Christ and God when we do those things. If you have any prayers or requests before the church, now's a good time that we bring those up. If you have loved ones or if you are struggling spiritually, let the body pray for you and ask God to help you in this. And I will read a verse that for Gary